Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. Very excited for today's guest, Michigan Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin. We will chat with her in just a few moments. But first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So there was someone who wrote in this week, and he or she, I don't know who they were because they were hiding behind anonymity, but they were attacking me for my comments that I've been making on the student protests. And I'm not going to read any of the long email because it's filled with a lot of false accusations, mistruths, and bias, which I won't legitimize by repeating them. But there is one thing I'll read from it. Quote, "I'm not sure about what you're trying to accomplish with these anti-protest rants." Well, that's an easy one. What I'm trying to accomplish is I'm using my public platform, my voice, to do exactly what President Biden did in his address this week by condemning the most disgusting, dangerous display of anti-Semitism that I've witnessed in my 64 years of living in this country. And quite honestly, it's something everyone with any measure of power, influence, and or humanity should be doing. And I'll say this again, because apparently it falls on deaf ears. I'm a liberal Democrat. I love democracy. I 100% support free speech and peaceful protests. Protesting is not just our right, but our obligation. And I wish there were way more protests on college campuses across America about subjects ranging from healthcare and gun violence to climate change and the relentless assault on reproductive rights and the existential threat to democracy and so on. And in fact, it shocks me that we don't see that happening, that too few young people seem to care about those critical issues right here at home. And while I am a staunch supporter of Israel and its right to exist, I also hate seeing the death of innocent Palestinians and the destruction of Gaza. And I support Palestinian rights and a two-state solution. But what I don't, can't, and won't support is illegal protesting, violent protesting, hate speak protesting, calls for death to Jews and genocide in Israel protesting, protests that involve the break-in and seizure of buildings and the destruction of property within them, protests that support Hamas, terrorism, and enemies to America. And if you can't agree with all of that, and what's worse, you choose instead to accuse me and others of being against free speech and peaceful protests because we condemn illegal and violent protests and the despicable anti-Semitism taking place at them, and deny that it is taking place, then you are complicit in this hate. All right, let's get to our big thing this week, which is Trump. So much going on. Yesterday, in fact, the judge in the New York election interference, also known as the hush money trial, rejected motions by Trump and his lawyers for a mistrial and an amended gag order. They're going to do whatever they possibly can to delay, to obfuscate, and the court system is going to continue to, at best case, afford him every courtesy as a former president, and at worst case, as we see down in Florida, be completely in the tank for him.
Yeah, I've always thought Aileen Cannon wants a higher position, and she's never going to get it with the Democrat, so the chances of Trump winning are some percentage that's, even or better than even. And if he does win, she's going to be looking at, God knows, a Supreme Court justice nomination. I wouldn't be surprised.
Trump, during Stormy Daniels' testimony, he got so pissed off. At one point, he was audibly cursing, and the judge had to warn his lawyer, Todd Blanche, to get Trump to shut the fuck up.
In between farting.
I mean, how much would we... I would pay to have that thing televised. I wish that trial was televised. Just to watch him sitting there turning purple, steam coming off the top of his head, fuck. Like, just imagine what it must be like. I'm actually thinking of waiting online just to get in and watch that thing. It's probably the best show out there right now.
The other half the time, he's just sleeping.
Or farting, to your point. Sleeping and farting. The sound effects between like, fuck. Like, it just must be like going to the circus. That's what I feel like. In all seriousness, what I really am enraged at is how they're attacking and assailing Stormy Daniels' character. And this happens to women all the time. This is why women don't come forward when they're raped, right? It doesn't matter what Stormy Daniels does for a living, right? It doesn't matter if she's a sex worker, stripper, porn actor, porn director. It doesn't matter who she slept with or how many people she's had sex with. She didn't break the law. Trump did. She's not on trial. Trump is. But if you watch this testimony and cross-examination, you think she's on trial. You think her past is on trial. It doesn't matter. None of that shit matters. They are desperate. And the fact that they kept her on the stand as long as they did was not only an act of desperation, it was an act of foolishness.
But the funny part is that it doesn't even matter if she was lying because he paid her the money and lied about it as a business record. And so the case would still be a real case.
Mm-hmm.
She was so strong and she gave him like it right back, and she can hold her head up high.
The lawyers have been terrible. That's all I can say. Trump is not getting his money's worth for $95,000 a day or what we hear he's spending.
Mm-hmm. But apparently what had set him off is when she was talking about what a bad lay he is.
I mean, I don't know why that would bother him. My goodness.
I don't know why that would bother any man.
How could she possibly know? According to him, she didn't actually have sex with him.
That's a good point.
That's right. But could you imagine what he would do if she was sitting there talking about his little mushroom ween? What that would do? Not only is he a bad lay, but the guy's packing 2 inches. He's hung like a fucking elevator button.
I was totally waiting for that in the transcript. I was super disappointed.
Oh my God! The top of his orange head would have, that dead animal hair would have like ignited, and then like the flames would have been flying all over.
And the worst part is his lawyers are so dumb they wouldn't have even objected.
Well, she got him last night. She tweeted, quote, "Real men respond to testimony by being sworn in and taking the stand in court. Oh, wait, never mind." Gotta hand it to her, man. She's got some feisty fingers.
Yeah, she can push his buttons like nobody else.
But the other thing that really upsets me, again, in all seriousness, is like they said to her, you direct porn movies. There are people naked and fucking all over the place. And you were shocked to see Donald Trump on his bed in boxers? That's like, she was wearing a miniskirt. She was asking for it.
Yeah, I don't think the women on the jury were too pleased with the slut shaming, but also I think she had a good response to that. Like if she was making up a story, it would have been a hell of a lot better.
Like this is a bad porn film.
And every woman wants to hear their nuts and sluts.
Yeah, and also, what's hot when you're with a man?
What?
When he tells you remind him of his daughter. Women love that when they're about to have sex. Oh, tell me the part where I look like I remind you of your daughter again.
Wow, right. So,
Jesus. Michael Cohen, Monday.
That's what we hear.
That's going to be really interesting. Because from what everybody says, it's like, as much as you think Stormy set him off, wait till Michael sits on that witness stand.
He's going to lunge after Michael Cohen.
Yeah, and what's interesting, too, is because people talk about Michael Cohen also being volatile and liking to give the jabs, which he can. But we've had him on this podcast several times. I think he can be really controlled when he needs to be and wants to be. And I think people are going to be surprised, just like he did when he testified before Congress. Remember that?
Yes. And to your point, that was for several hours.
Yes. So, I think it's going to blow the top of Donald Trump's head off.
Yeah, although I think Trump is probably not going to be more upset than he was when Stormy Daniels was talking about his sexual prowess.
Let's see.
Donald Trump cares more about money and loyalty than he does about how performative his little ween is. It's close, but I think Michael's going to get him in the end. And I think there's going to be more gag order violations. And I think next week we could literally see Donald Trump.
Yeah, but he has a
jail cell.
He has a workaround for the gag order now, as you saw, Senator Scott from Florida. So he just invites people to join him and then say everything he's not supposed to say to the press.
I think Judge Marchand is not fucking around. I think he's made it crystal clear to Trump, do it again, and you are really risking landing in jail.
I agree. But the judge isn't going to stop a senator from saying anything they want to.
Yeah.
Basically, the senators that he's bringing on, and I guarantee you Tim Scott would be more than happy to come and chat anything that Trump puts in his head.
Yeah, we're going to get to Tim Scott in a second. So Mike Johnson, and this is the scary part, because when you think about the existential threat to democracy, there are people in place that weren't in place back then. There's not going to be a Mike Pence on the night of certification. There may not be a speaker who upholds the Constitution and the rule of law. So Mike Johnson this week said, quote, Trump has done nothing wrong. We need accountability. It's bigger than President Trump. It's about the people's faith in our system of justice. All of these cases need to be dropped because they are a threat to our entire system. All right, now picture that guy in the House chamber, 2029, and Trump picks up the phone and says, don't certify, don't help, don't do anything. Vice President Tim Scott's going to not certify tonight, and then you guys need to get behind me and put up different electors and decide this election in Congress. Like, that's the scary part. All right, let's get to Judge Cannon. She's postponed the stolen documents trial indefinitely. She's going to do anything humanly possible to delay this as much as possible. But he's still going to face trial. It's a case that she doesn't have the power to make disappear. She can use her position on the bench to throw whatever obstacle in front of the trial that she can, but she can't make it disappear. But it puts to rest any doubt what her motivations are.
If he wins the election, he's not facing any trials, including Georgia, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, he can't make state trials go away.
He can't, but Georgia's governor and everyone else in power
course.
can push things in directions that will make it go away.
Well, we could just make it simple and say, if you believe, like I do, that there's no way he's going to be president again, he's ultimately going to face trial.
I agree with that, if he's not president.
But Ty Cobb, not the baseball player, because he's dead. Ty Cobb, the former Trump attorney.
Who looks like the Quaker Oats man with a beard.
With the flu. He said, quote, this is a combination of bias and incompetence about Judge Aileen Cannon. Man, is he right.
She wants to be an appeals court judge or a Supreme Court justice. And, she's doing the right thing if that's her goal. Because if Trump wins, she is definitely going to be nominated for a much higher position.
100%.
Well, it just depends who controls Congress. She has to get through the confirmation hearings.
Well, the Senate is really the issue.
Yes.
And the Senate's going to be pretty evenly divided. And if the Republicans have one extra vote, I mean, they will have, if he wins, they'll obviously have the tie-breaking vote with the vice president.
Mm-hmm. Over in Georgia, the appeals court has decided that they are going to hear the case, the motion that Trump and his lawyers filed to have Fani Willis dismissed.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, this system is giving him every courtesy. It doesn't matter whether he deserves it or not. He's a former president. He's also running for president. And like it or not, the system is just giving him every courtesy. And hopefully, to your point, somehow this doesn't end in total disaster. Judicially, in terms of our democracy, hopefully it is nothing more than just cans being kicked down the road. Eventually the cans have to stop rolling, hopefully.
In the system that we currently live in.
Yeah. Well, that's the big, if you believe that there is an existential threat to democracy, then yeah, absolutely. That our system that we're used to right now may not be our system anymore. All right, let's talk a little bit about the election. Let's go to this clip.
Republicans, get it out of your mind that you're going to vote for this guy because he's conservative. He's not. And for those of you that want to vote because you think he's an anti-vaxxer, he's not really an anti-vaxxer. That's only his political moment. I'd even take Biden over Jr. because our country would last about a year or two longer than it would with Jr. It would collapse almost immediately, and his family, a radical left, a crazy left, a bunch of lunatics, would take over, and our country will die very quickly. So RFK's views on vaccines are fake, as is everything else about his candidacy. He is not a Republican, so don't think you're going to vote for him and feel good.
That to me sounds like a guy who's scared shitless, okay? Scared shitless of Bobby Kennedy Jr.
10% in the polls.
And no, we'll talk about it in a second. But
Okay.
the key thing for me that he said there is that he literally said Biden is better. He hasn't done shit like that before. Trump is not a very complicated man. So he blurts out from his id whatever's really in his brain and in whatever thing that pumps in his body to move the blood around. That's not a heart, but like some kind of heart-like organ, because he's not human. So when he says Biden is better, that's interesting to me, really fascinating to me. I think him and his team, they do their internal polling. They believe that Bobby is going to pull way more from him than Biden. He'll pull from Biden a little bit. Nobody knows for sure, but I think Trump's a great telegrapher.
Yeah, nobody knows for sure. I think one thing that seems clear, Bobby will decide this election, one way or the other.
If he's still in it.
Well,
There's a very strong chance he might not be in it.
Why? Why do you say that?
Because he may not be on the ballot.
He's going to be on the ballot in a lot of states, in the states that matter.
That's what he says. That's what some people say. But right now he's in like 4 states.
Well, the election's going to be decided by only 4 states.
Well, he's in Michigan. We know that. So that's going to be a factor. But I continue to say that 6 months, 7 months, whatever, is a lifetime in politics. And we see it every day. We're seeing it every day. So who knows what's going to happen?
We don't know what's going to happen. But if he's on the ballot, which he appears to be in Michigan and some other states, any percentage that he takes from a particular candidate is going to decide the election, just much like we've seen in the past, where there's been one candidate that only takes 2% and it changes the election.
Sure. Look, and this, in all seriousness, this worm story, it could be a problem. I mean, it's it
could be.
There's definitely humor there, and I'm sure the humor on some level isn't even lost on Bobby, because he's got a good sense of humor. But you're now talking about a presidential candidate, and this wasn't an admission. This was something that the New York Times uncovered because there was a deposition that Bobby gave in 2012, I believe. So this was not a disclosed piece of information. This came out. And you're talking about somebody who wants to be president of the United States, who at that time says that doctors diagnosed that he had parasitic worm that ate part of his brain. And
That came out during the divorce proceedings, that he had to show that he wasn't as cognitively intact as he could have been. So he was not required to pay as much to his ex-wife. But now he's just fine. Thank you. Let's move along.
No more alimony.
But you're talking about an election where age is a big factor, health is a big factor, and I'm not sure this story goes away in a couple of days. But on this subject, and this is what pisses me off about people and where we are in America today, Georgia Representative Mike Collins, this is what he tweeted. This is what he decided was important to tweet. You either die a Kennedy with a hole in the brain or live long enough to become a Kennedy with a hole in the brain. I mean, that is just unconscionable. That's a person without a soul. All right, last but not least, Tim Scott. Let's play this clip.
At the end of the day, the 47th president of the United States will be President Donald Trump. And I'm excited to give back to low inflation, low unemployment.
Wait,
and high
Senator, yes or
enthusiasm.
no? Yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024 no matter who wins?
That is my statement.
But is it just yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024?
I look forward to President Trump being the 47th president. Kristen, you could ask him multiple times. but
Senator,
the
just
answer
a yes
to the
or no
question at the end of the
answer.
day. So the American people will make the decision.
But I don't
and
hear
the
you
decision will be
committing-
for President Trump. That's clear.
I don't hear you committing
I'm
to the
not-
election
here-
result.
Here's the challenge.
Will you commit to accepting the election
This is why
results?
so many Americans believe that NBC is an extension of the Democrat Party. At the end of the day, I said what I've said. I know that the American people, their voices will be heard, and I believe that President Trump will be our next president. It's that simple.
I mean, how humiliating was that for Tim Scott? Every time we think he can't humiliate himself anymore, he manages to somehow find a new way to do it.
I think what we saw during the primaries, this is just more of the same. He's really not good at these things. He's just bad.
That's a really big compliment. Not good.
He can't
He's
handle.
fucking awful. He is an embarrassment.
Well, here's the thing, though. Who's his audience? He has an audience of one. He wants to be the VP pick. No matter what he says, it only is to appeal to one person, if you want to call it a person.
It's not a complicated question for a member of the United States Senate who has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution.
Well, he answered the question by not answering the question. So there's your answer.
Yeah, I mean, I would bet you that every single person, senator or congressperson, who thinks they're in the running to be the VP pick would answer the question exactly the same way.
Yes.
I mean, look, he didn't say he murdered a puppy. So in terms of the VP stakes,
Not yet.
right, he is more appealing than Kristi Noem.
Yeah, but I wonder, though, does Trump really care that she murdered a puppy? Because, he hates animals.
She's another one, Kristi Noem. She's on TV, and she's getting mad at interviewers.
Well, it's also the Kim Jong-un lie that came out in the book.
I love how she says, I am not going to discuss what I discuss with world leaders, except the lie that I put in my book about the discussion I had with a world leader. This is where we are today. I mean, it's like we can laugh and joke about this, but you have Tim Scott literally humiliating himself in ways the human race has never seen before. You have Kristi Noem, who thinks she's going to score points by bragging that she murdered a puppy and a goat. What's next?
I didn't know about the goat.
It's a goat.
Oh, my God.
It's so bad what's happening right now. But seriously, what they think is going to be impressive and make them to Trump and make them stand above the rest. Why would anyone think, yep, it's a good idea to say I murdered a puppy? I'm going to get some good press out of that one. Right? What is wrong with these people? I mean, am I missing something?
I don't know. The murder puppy
wait.
thing.
You guys literally, for a second, you just sounded like Tim Scott.
It's so hard to answer these inane. I don't know. I think we can all agree that we need to get people to vote for Biden. And that's it. I mean, because this is just fucking crazy. That's it.
It is crazy. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, 2 Ukrainian officials were arrested for treason for alleged Russian plot to kill Zelensky. My loser, Ohio. President Biden could still be left off the November ballot because the DNC would take place after certification deadlines for presidential nominees.
My winner is Stormy Daniels for demonstrating how bad Trump's lawyers are when she was cross-examined and on Thursday. My loser actually is the ADL for having the audacity to attack Joe Biden by saying that his possible curtailment of weapons to Israel will, and I quote, embolden terror while energizing Hezbollah and Iran, unquote.
My winners this week, the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers. Oh, my God. Finally, New York sports fans can feel like Boston sports fans have felt for the last 500 years. My losers, Judge Aileen Cannon for continuing to demonstrate what political bias and judicial malpractice looks like. Marjorie Taylor Greene for suffering a humiliating motion to vacate defeat and thus greatly diminished power. And Kristi Noem for the worst political PR disaster in history. All right, let's get to Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin. She is a Democrat, and she represents Michigan's 7th Congressional District and serves on the Armed Services and Agriculture Committees. Following grad school after the September 11th attacks, she was recruited by the CIA to be a Middle East analyst, and within a year she was sent on the first of 3 tours in Iraq alongside the U.S. military. She's held national security roles in the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations, and for President Obama she helped negotiate some of the Pentagon's most sensitive national security matters, from the fight against ISIS to the U.S. response to Russian aggression. In 2018, she was elected to the House of Representatives, flipping a Trump district. She was reelected in 2020. Congresswoman, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
So I saw a clip of former President Donald Trump at a recent rally in your home state, Michigan. He called you a far-left liberal lunatic. Is that like a badge of honor? I ask that as a diehard liberal. That's my dream, is to be called a far-left liberal lunatic by Donald Trump.
We thought it was just a matter of time until he called me out, and we were waiting, to see and take bets on what the nickname would be or what the moniker would be. I do think it's a little ironic or a little funny. I'm a, former CIA officer and Pentagon official, so
Right.
He's probably the first person who's called me that. That's for sure. But I guess I don't know. In the scale of Trump nicknames, I guess it could have been worse. And I think the nickname is one thing. The kind of spewing lies with everyone smiling behind him is a whole other thing. But it was just a matter of time till they came after him.
And so what do you make of Mike Rogers, who's, I would assume, the leading Republican candidate who will likely be your opponent in November for the seat vacated by Debbie Stabenow? What do you make of him coming back and sidling up to Trump and that whole thing with him on stage? And is that just the same sycophantic fealty we've seen from so many other people who just, they know who Trump is? I mean, Mike Rogers is not a dumb guy, and he's always struck me as a fairly reasonable guy for a Republican, although these days, I don't even know what that means anymore. But it's interesting how the Trump endorsement still means so much, given that he's literally sitting in a courtroom as a criminal defendant.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will say I think that Republican primary for the Senate is still very competitive, and we just had a big TV buy all over the state from Mike Rogers, one of his opponents. So I'm not sure this is a done deal.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that competitiveness, yes, there was a lot of work that went into getting the Trump endorsement, it appears. And what that meant was, doing a 180 on a lot of things that I had known Mike Rogers to believe. And, he was a former FBI officer who now is just attacking the FBI every week. And, NATO and Ukraine and sort of national security, peace through strength things that comes from Ronald Reagan. He's now, thrown out the window, and that fealty to Trump is still desperately alive and well if people want to win a primary. And it's sad. I mean, we had done bipartisanship events in the past, and the CIA officer, former CIA officer, former FBI officer, but he looks very different than the person I sat on stage with many years ago now.
Well, it's just fascinating how Trump continues to be able to corrupt people. I mean, you have a national security background. You look at someone like Lindsey Graham, like what happened to him, a strong defense hawk. It's amazing how Trump has infiltrated the minds of these people, and they're just unrecognizable, to your point. One of the things Trump has done over the years is to just make everything, conventional wisdom is out the window. And one of the things that obviously was not conventional wisdom was Liz Cheney campaigning with you and endorsing you in the past. Do you feel like you're going to get that kind of support again? Do you also feel like Joe Biden might get that kind of support this year, given her commitment to defeating Trump and Trumpism?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're sitting here a day after the news that Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House, has said publicly he's not voting for Trump. I think there's a lot of folks who, were sort of senior leaders of the Republican Party of old that are putting their marker on the table, which I think is important. But what is a common thread among most of them is that they're no longer in office. They're not in those leadership positions. And I think that's what needs to be reconciled, is how do we get it so that people are able to speak their mind kind of on their way out, to where they're able to speak their mind while they're in and still keep their seat, right? I mean, I think that's the trick there. And so I do think, I know that there's a bunch of Republicans who are poised to come out in support of Biden, and we've always had a Republicans for Slotkin kind of group that supported me since 2018. And look, here's the thing. I mean, I grew up, my dad's lifelong Republican. My mom was a lifelong Democrat. In Michigan, that's totally normal, or it was. And I deeply believe in two healthy parties that push and pull on each other and make policy better, right? I mean, I think that's how it should work and how it was designed to work. So I'm not looking for a one-party country. I don't think that's healthy. But the Republican Party right now is not reflecting that sort of push and pull on policy. It's no longer, there's no center, sort of small government, lower taxes, which used to be kind of the bumper sticker of the Republican Party. I can't say that about half my colleagues. And it's all about like winning and just crushing the other side, no matter what, no matter the cost for the tactics. And that's not healthy. And frankly, when they're unhealthy, Democrats get a little unhealthy too. I mean, the system is out of whack. The ecosystem is out of whack. That's for sure.
So you guys just recently had a presidential primary a couple of months ago. There was about 13% uncommitted. How concerned are you about that? Or do you view that as people are upset with Biden and his Israeli policy, war policy, support of Netanyahu, but there's 6 months left. There's a lot of room for this conflict to settle, and this won't have the kind of impact on the election on Biden that people fear. What's your take on that?
Well, in a swing state like Michigan, the minute you sleep on Michigan and think it's all going to be okay is the minute it flips back. So I don't know anyone, any Michigander at least, who says, oh yeah, Michigan's all good and just put your feet up. The uncommitted vote needs to be taken seriously, and people exercise their right to show their frustration. I would note the Nikki Haley vote was a lot larger on the Trump side, or on the Republican side, which is also a protest vote in its own way.
I was going to say that on the flip side, Nikki Haley with the Pennsylvania primary in Indiana that we saw this week, that's really interesting that she's still pulling around 20%. What's going to win out at the end of the day? Is there going to be more protest vote against Biden, or does Donald Trump really not have as strong a hold on the Republican electorate as he needs? It's just interesting to see how that's going to play out.
I think turnout in Michigan is the real risk. And, certainly the Arab and Muslim American community are so hurt and so frustrated and feel so dehumanized. But I've heard lots of things from the African American community, from young people, and that trifecta right there. If there's low turnout for all three of those groups, well, you've got trouble up and down the ticket. So that's where we're focusing a lot of attention.
And with Bobby Kennedy Jr. now being on the ballot in Michigan, what is that going to do?
Yeah, and unfortunately, Michiganders love them a third party. When they're frustrated with both parties, they, look, if Jill Stein had not been on our ballot in 2016, then Hillary Clinton would have won Michigan. So the third party thing is real. And so we have a lot of work to do to sort of earn people's vote in Michigan and make sure they don't go to, either a third party candidate, or they just don't get out of their homes. They don't go and vote.
We're seeing a continued relentless assault by Trump and Republicans against women's bodily autonomy. How much will abortion, reproductive rights, IVF, will that positively impact Biden? And is that enough to counter anger and frustration elsewhere, i.e. Israel?
I think it's still very much a live issue because the other side of the aisle has not stopped going after some form of a woman's choice in family planning since they overturned Roe. And in Michigan, we did our job. We got this as a ballot initiative in 2022, and we voted it in with big numbers because we were a full ban state. So we were looking over the cliff at being a fully banned state for abortion. We got it on the ballot and we voted it in. But whether it's going after IVF and contraception, going after women's travel to another place, going after the drugs to conduct an abortion. I mean, if you are an abortion clinic in Ann Arbor, and it's legal in the state of Michigan, but you can't get your hands on mifepristone, the drug that conducts 50% of abortions, then you don't have access to abortion. So they just have not stopped going after it. And even though lots of candidates, including in my Senate race, are now completely changing their tune after 20 years of being hardcore pro-life, people see it for what it is. And I had an exchange in the airport the other day that I think encapsulates where people are on this issue. There's a guy walking up to me. He's making a beeline. He looks a lot like Senator John Fetterman, right? So imagine tall, bald, beard, hoodie, shorts. And classic Michigan, I have no idea how this guy votes. I have no idea his politics. So when he's making a beeline for me, I'm sort of like girding myself. This happens a lot, that kind of MAGA conversation. And he comes over to me and he says, hey, I just wanted to shake your hand. This is exactly what he said. I just wanted to shake your hand I'm a lifelong Republican, but like, I got 3 daughters. And I know. And he said, and these guys are so a mess. I don't know what right they'll take away next. And I said, I know, man, I know. And that is, I think, the chaos around this issue on the other side of the aisle, where Alabama could take away a woman's right to IVF, almost like without them even totally processing it. It's like there's such a mess. Don't trust them with their rights, with your rights. And I think we need to be more assertive about that.
Yeah, I think women are fired up, and I think that's going to be a much bigger impact on this election than even people are talking about. Let's switch to the House. Yesterday, we saw your party, Democrats, helped rescue Speaker Mike Johnson with the defeat of Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate. It wasn't just a humiliating loss for her, but doesn't it kind of signal that her power and influence is greatly diminished? Or in fact, has she jumped the shark finally?
I don't know. I mean, again, that's for Republicans to decide if she's jumped the shark. I think, to be honest, the reason why she didn't get a lot of support, it was going back to a couple of weeks ago when Speaker Johnson went down to see Trump and kind of got the blessing, right? And Trump said, I love Marjorie. She's great. But, we have a slim majority. We got to do what we can in the House. That was sort of him putting the thumb on the scale. They still needed, Big Dad to come in and say which of the kids was going to get to win this fight. And then she kind of doubled down, right? She had lost face and had to try and double down. She's still one of the biggest fundraisers. She still has a huge following. I'm hoping that yesterday, with the help of Democrats, we helped Speaker Johnson choose, sort of quasi-normal mainline Republican versus real sort of radical right. But who knows? And, I think the thing I think about a lot is, at Speaker Johnson could be the speaker in place when we have to certify the next election.
Right.
And we certified the 2020 election. Nancy Pelosi, we were all barricaded in our offices. It was January 6th. We had all been scattered to the wind. And she called us back that night. She wouldn't let us go home, which was the right move, so that we certified that damn election that night. I want to know what Mike Johnson's going to do if Trump loses and refuses to accept that. Will he certify the 2024 election? So there's a lot of open questions there, even though I think we made the right move yesterday.
So politics is a game of calculation, and if it's done right, it's about the long game. What did Democrats get in return for rescuing Mike Johnson?
So Hakeem Jeffries was the one, obviously, going back and forth with Speaker Johnson. And so I don't want to go through, sort of their private conversations. I'll leave that to him. But we made a decision that while most of us don't agree with most of what Speaker Johnson believes to his core, another 2 or 3 months of chaos when we've got things to do, things to reauthorize, like the business of government, was just not in the interest of the country. So many held their nose and supported him and kept him in there with the understanding that someone has to be the adult. But look, the behind the scenes conversations are behind the scenes for a reason and should stay behind the scenes.
I'm no fan of Mike Johnson. I think he's dangerous for the reasons you said, and then some, including abortion. To me, he's straight out of the Handmaid's Tale. But do you think he's done a decent job as Speaker, all things considered, and what could have been with someone more crazy in that seat?
Well, look, I think about, if Jim Jordan were to get the Speaker of the House, and remember, he was a candidate, right? And you start to think about people who are more seasoned and more of bomb throwers and more crafty in many ways. We've seen him as chairman. And so, sometimes the devil, is better than others.
Sure.
But I think he did the bare minimum of, putting the Ukraine package on the floor. So we're rewarding someone. I acknowledge that. We're rewarding him for doing the bare minimum of putting a bill on the floor that passed by a wide bipartisan margin, right? So doing what the average member of Congress wanted. But in this environment, we're just trying to hold on to the pilot light of the Republican Party, just keeping them sane as much as possible, or dealing with the sane ones as much as possible. And again, I acknowledge that there's no perfect solution, but man, I'd rather have Mike Johnson than Jim Jordan as speaker.
Yeah, no, it's literally the definition of the lesser of two evils. My last question to you is, and I ask this partly as a Jew, what do you make of the college protests and the rampant anti-Semitism that seems to be sweeping across this country right now?
Yeah, I think we've just had sort of at some of these places where it's really gotten kind of out of control, it's just like a failure of leadership. For me, I'm not going to say it's ever perfect, but a campus is different than the wider world, right? A lot of these young people were protesting on the street instead of on a campus. They'd actually have much more leeway to say whatever horrible things that they wanted to say. But on a campus, there are rules to allow students to be able to get an education free from physical blockage, but also intimidation, influence, bullying, right? And I think, to me, the line is, if you are protesting, certainly if you're physically blocking a young person from getting to class, we got a real problem. But if you are creating an intimidating environment by using language or imagery that threatens violence, right? If you've got a picture of a terrorist with a Kalashnikov, on one of your posters saying like "Viva the Armed Revolution," no, you are intoning a physical threat. So you don't get to do that on a college campus. And if you're saying "Death to all Zionists," no, you don't get to say that on campus and not have any consequences. And so I think that line is, I admit that that's complicated, right? That is a difficult line, but it exists. And I think where we've seen it really go out of control is where there's just been no distinction made between a peaceful right to protest with nonviolent language and nonviolent imagery, which I accept and believe in, and then where it teeters into these things that are, in some cases, anti-Semitic, in some cases just horrible, right? You start saying guillotine for your leadership. Like, no, any violent imagery, I believe, violates their own rules of conduct, including at a place like Columbia, right, where I went to grad school. So I think we've had some failures of leadership. And by the way, I bet you a lot of those young people, 19, 20, 21 years old, they also want to know the line, right? They also, say to them, you want to protest, do it, but you use any violent imagery or violent language and you're going to have a consequence. I bet you they want to know that too.
Yeah.
So I just think it's been a failure of leadership at these institutions that have really kind of blown up.
I couldn't agree more, and I would also love to see some reference at these protests to October 7th, because whatever is happening 6,000 miles away isn't happening in a vacuum. Everything didn't start October 8th. Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming in here. It was a real pleasure to have you, and I hope you'll come back.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.